Minister, you've answered 28 oral questions since your appointment, not one of them in relation to carers. And carers are the backbone of our health and care system in Ireland. And there are over 4,400 full-time carers in my own constituency of Roscommon, Galway, and the vast majority of them have faced significant additional burdens as a result of COVID-19. It would be a terrible thing, Minister, if their plight was not raised directly with you in advance of the budget.
Thank you, Corla, and thank you, Deputy, for raising this. At the end of August 2020, there were 87,733 people in receipt of carers allowance. The projected expenditure in 2020 is approximately 919 million. A primary qualifying condition for the carers allowance is that the applicant provides full-time care and attention to a person in need of such a level of care. However, to support a carer's continued attachment to the workforce and broader social inclusion, carers may engage in some limited employment, education or training while still being regarded as being in a position to provide full-time care. During this time of employment, education or training, adequate provision must be made for the care of the relevant person. Carers allowance is a statutory scheme, and both the full-time care and attention requirement and the 18.5-hour limitation are set out in legislation. The number of hours per week that carers may engage in employment, education or training that has been recently increased substantially. As part of Budget 2020, it was actually increased from 15 hours to 18.5 hours per week, and this measure was prioritised in response to carers who expressed that they found 15 hours to be too restrictive, not only for work but for education and for training purposes. I consider that the current limit maintains a reasonable balance between the requirement to provide full-time care for the care recipient and the needs of the carer. While I will of course continue to seek to improve the position of carers, and I thank the Deputy for raising it, any changes to payment schemes would have to be considered in an overall budgetary context. So I hope this clarifies the matter.
Minister, at the outset can I say that I'm specifically talking about people that are being cared for where they're in daycare, where they're in a training centre or where they're in school. Now, I accept the point that it has been increased, and I welcome it and supported Minister Doherty in relation to that, moving it from 15 hours a week up to 18.5 hours a week, and that's to be commended. But you say the reason for doing that is that to ensure that the care recipient's requirement for full-time care is balanced against the carer's need to maintain contact with the workforce. Now, Minister, if you go to two other schemes under your department, the Community Employment Scheme and the Rural Social Scheme, under both of those schemes, it has been specified that the minimum number of hours that people need to be engaged within the workforce or engaged in training in order to maintain that connection with the workforce and training is 19.5 hours a week. So at a very minimum, should that threshold not be increased to a minimum of 19.5 hours where it doesn't have an impact in terms of the care being provided?
Okay, thank you. Well, Deputy, this as I said, was reviewed and it was looked at in detail, and the recommendation that came from that review was 18.5 hours for people who are doing this really important work. So as I said, it was only brought in this year in the budget 2020. I take the point that you're making there in terms of people on CE schemes can get 19.5 hours, but as I said, these things are always kept under review. But in view of the fact that it has only just been changed, I think that I don't know if the basis for changing it has changed. In fact, the basis for that decision has actually changed in such a short period of time. But it's like everything else in my department. We do keep these matters under review.
Minister, I think look, across schemes we need to address anomalies, and this is one anomaly where it's 18.5 hours for carers, it's 19.5 hours for community employment and the rural social scheme. Having said that, Minister, the specific cohort of people I'm talking about are where the person that's being cared for is not in their home. So they're not available to provide care because that person is in daycare, is in a training centre or is in school. So take a parent of a disabled child who is in primary school. That child is out of the home for a minimum of 5 hours and 40 minutes every single day, which is 28 hours a week. And we're saying that it's okay for that carer to remain at home and sit looking at four walls in order to draw down the carer's allowance. But they can't go out for 20 hours a week and work and engage with people within their own community. Now, there's something fundamentally wrong with that system. There needs to be discretion in relation to that 18.5 hours threshold, Minister.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. And I hear the point that you make, and as I say, it has only just been changed. And in view of that fact, I don't know why what you're saying wasn't taken into consideration when they were obviously making this recommendation. I'll certainly, just look at the basis for the recommendation, but. Again, it's something we always keep these things under review.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister. We go again. Denis Naughten, question 34.
Yes, Minister, again, it's an issue regarding carers. The income disregard, Minister, for the carers allowance was consistently increased during the noughties, and there was a policy decision to try and do that, to try and make as many people as eligible as possible. However, in the last 12 years, that income disregard has not been altered whatsoever. And the failure to actually expand that income disregard means that families on the average industrial income are now precluded from accessing the carers allowance.
Thank you, Corla, and again, Deputy, thanks for raising this specific issue also relating to carers. As you know, carers allowance is a means-tested payment for carers who, on a full-time basis, look after certain people in need of full-time care and attention, where the carer's income falls below certain limits. At the end of August 2020, there were 87,733 people in receipt of carers, and the projected expenditure is approximately 919 million. The means test for carers allowance is probably the most generous in the social welfare system, most notably with regard to earnings disregards. The amount of weekly earnings disregarded is €332.50 for a single person and €665 for a couple. A couple earning up to €37,500 per year can qualify for the maximum rate, and a couple earning €49,750 can, due to the tapered withdrawal approach, retain a payment of just under half rate. A single person may keep a full rate payment while having an annual income of just under €19,000 and keep a payment of just under half rate while having an annual income of €25,400. The means test conditionality for carers allowance is consistent with the overall rules that apply to social assistance payments. The system of social assistance supports provides payments based on an income need, with the means test playing the critical role in determining whether or not an income need arises as a consequence of a particular contingency, that is, be that illness, disability, unemployment or caring. The application of a means test not only ensures that the recipient has an income need, but also that scarce resources are targeted to those with the greatest need. Any changes to the means condition for carers' allowance would have implications for overall spending and would need to be addressed in a budgetary context.
Minister, I'm not comfortable with the phrase that you've used about it being the most generous income disregard. Yes, it is, but there's a good reason for that. Because the reality is, Minister, for every single person, particularly an older person, that's kept out of a nursing home, that saves the taxpayer between €600 and €800 every single week. If it is a child or an adult with a profound disability, the savings are multiples of that on a weekly basis. Now, if you increased the income disregard in line with the increase in the minimum wage between 2008 and today, the income disregard for a single person would be €388, and the income disregard for a married couple would be €776.50. So even keeping in line with the minimum wage, this is falling well short of where it should be, Minister.
Thank you. And can I just say I understand the point that the Deputy is making, and I think that this is part of a wider debate which crosses into the area of health policy. The Deputy will understand that the key role of my department is that of income support. And we're charged with identifying where a person has an income support need and providing that income support in the form, for instance, of a job seeker's payment, a disability allowance or a carer's allowance. I agree that we do need to look at the wider picture. When you see, there are opportunities for people who could remain at home if they had, if a carer, but again, that's about, is a carer's job a full-time job? And if it is, then it has to be rewarded for that. But what I'm doing is an income support, and that, to me, is a bigger issue that needs to be addressed by the Department of Health.
Minister, can I say at the outset, I fully accept, as Minister for Social Protection, your focus is on income support. I fully accept that. But the reality is the carer's allowance was never designed solely as an income support because of the income disregard that was brought in, because of the need to try and support as many older people as possible to remain in their own homes, and of course younger people with disabilities. Now, you also have responsibility for rural and community affairs, and I think a broader view needs to be taken of this across government. And I think the responsibility is on government as a whole to look at this, rather than just kicking the can into your particular department, which is the easy and soft option to do in relation to it. But, Minister, we need to see movement in terms of the income that carers receive for the work that they do. If we look at the carers allowance, since 2009, actually the carers allowance has gone down. And if you look at it compared to the minimum wage, then the rate of carers allowance today should be €257.50, just to keep in line with the rate of increase on the minimum wage. This really needs to be looked at in the context of the budget, Minister.
And I think, and not taking away from the absolutely wonderful work that carers do right up and down the length of this country, and I think it's, they really do, the state, a great service in terms of what they do for people who need this support and assistance, whether it's elderly people or whether it's people with disabilities. They provide an absolutely vital service. And I think that you hit the nail on the head again there. Is it about an income, or is it about an income, or paying somebody for a job that they do, or is it about income support? I want to congratulate you, Deputy. You're now the chair of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Social Protection and on Rural and Community Development. And can I just say, I know. Well, can I just say that I'd be happy to engage with you, through your committee, and to see. But again, it's not just it's not confined to one department. There's a bigger conversation to be had here, and I think it's important that we have that conversation.
Thank you very much. 6 is Deputy Paul McAuliffe.
Minister, a short question. I wonder when we can expect